Hey, good morning, everybody. February 24th, 2023. I should be out dirt biking because I woke up to sun and it's bright in my eyes, but we're going to talk about the pipeline that Biden blew up. So, we're talking about journalist Seymour Hersh, and he published a follow up to his investigation that alleges that the United States blew up the Nordstream pipeline with help of Norway. Okay, so let's get to now, in his latest article, Hersh points out that Norway has a 60-year relationship with the United States to start wars. In fact, they were successful in starting the Vietnam War to help of the Norwegian Navy and top-of-the-line ships called the Nasty Class. I'm sure that sounds better in Norwegian. You know, we're being asked to remember the Vietnam War, which almost nobody now thinks was a good idea. It was an age-old, they fired first lie that cost millions of lives, mostly innocent Vietnamese civilians, and close to 60,000 US soldiers. And Norway here is a complicit actor yet again. So, if the Vietnam War had a similar origin story with Norway as a partner in crime, it would be naive to not ask, is this the sequel right now with Russia, Ukraine, NATO? If you guys want to go and read Seymour Hersh's Substack, seymourhersh.substack.com. And so, from the Gulf of Tonkin to the Baltic Sea, the secret and incomplete history of U.S.-Norway collaboration and covert events. So I'm going to read you his update here now. Why Norway? In my account of the Biden administration's decision to destroy the Nord Stream pipelines, why did so much of the secret planning and training for the operation take place in Norway? And why were highly skilled seamen and technicians from Norwegian Navy involved? The simple answer is that the Norwegian Navy has a long and murky history of cooperation with American intelligence. 5 months ago, that teamwork, about which we still know very little, resulted in the destruction of 2 pipelines on orders of President Biden, with international implications yet to be determined. And 6 decades ago, so the histories of those years have it, a small group of Norwegian seamen were entangled in a presidential deceit that led to an early and bloody turning point in the Vietnam War. Now, I'm going to read you guys Seymour Hersh's original article about the pipeline burst. And, you know, I'm sorry the sun's so damn bright, but yeah, you can see the picture there in the Baltic Sea. How America took out the Nord Stream pipeline. The New York Times called it a mystery, but the United States executive, a covert sea operation, was kept secret until now. So I'll read it to you. The U.S. Navy's Diving and Salvage Center can be found in a location as obscure as its name, down what was once a country lane in rural Panama City, a now booming resort city in the southwestern panhandle of Florida, 70 miles south of the Alabama border. The center's complex is a nondescript as its location, the drab concrete post-World War II structure that has the look of a vocational high school on the west side of Chicago. A coin-operated laundromat and a dance school are across from what now is a 4-lane road. The center has been training highly skilled deep-water divers for decades who, once assigned to American military units worldwide, are capable of technical diving to do the good, using C4 explosives to clear harbors and beaches of debris and unexploded ordnance, as well as the bad, like blowing up foreign oil rigs, following intake valves for undersea power plants, destroying locks on crucial shipping canals. The Panama City Center, which boasts the second largest indoor pool in America, was the perfect place to recruit the best and most taciturn graduates of the diving school who successfully did last summer what they had been authorized to do 260 feet under the surface of the Baltic Sea. Last June, the Navy divers, operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22, planted the remote-triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. 2 of the pipelines, which were known collectively as Nord Stream 1, had been providing Germany and much of Western Europe with cheap Russian natural gas for more than a decade. The second pair of pipelines, called Nordstream 2, had been built but were not yet operational. With the Russian troops massing on the Ukrainian border and the bloodiest war in Europe since 1945 looming, President Joseph Biden saw the pipelines as a vehicle for Vladimir Putin to weaponize natural gas for his political and territorial ambitions. Asked for comment, Adrienne Watson, a White House spokesperson, said in an email, "This is false and complete fiction." Tammy Thorpe, a spokesperson for the Central Intelligence Agency, similarly wrote, "This claim is completely and utterly false." Biden's decision to sabotage the pipelines came after more than 9 months of highly secret back-and-forth debates inside Washington's national security community about how to best achieve that goal. For some of that time, the issue was not whether to do the mission, but how to get it done with no overt clue as to who was responsible. There was a vital bureaucratic reason for relying on the graduates of the center's hardcore diving school in Panama. The divers were Navy only and not members of American Special Operations Command, whose covert operations must be reported to Congress and briefed in advance to the Senate and House leadership, the so-called Gang of Eight. The Biden administration was doing everything possible to avoid leaks as the planning took place in 2001 and into the first months of 2022. President Biden and his foreign policy team, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, and Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State for Policy, had been vocal and consistent in their hostility to the two pipelines, which ran side by side for 750 miles under the Baltic Sea from two different ports in northeastern Russia near the Estonia border, passing close to the Danish island of Bornholm before ending in northern Germany. The direct route, which bypassed any need to transit Ukraine, had been a boom for the German economy, which enjoyed an abundance of cheap Russian natural gas, enough to run its factories and heat its homes while enabling German distributors to sell excess gas and at a profit throughout Western Europe. Wow, that's interesting. The Germans were able to resell excess gas and make money. Continuing, action that could be traced to the administration would violate U.S. promises to minimize direct conflict with Russia. Secrecy was essential. From the earliest days, Nord Stream 1 was seen by Washington and its anti-Russian NATO partners as a threat to Western dominance. The holding company behind it, Nordstream AG, was incorporated in Switzerland in 2005 in partnership with Gazprom, a publicly traded Russian company producing enormous profits for shareholders, which is dominated by oligarchs known to be in the thrall of Putin. Gazprom controlled 51% of the company, with 4 European energy firms, 1 in France, 1 in Netherlands, and 2 in Germany, sharing the remaining 49% of stock and having the right to control downstream sales of the inexpensive natural gas to local distributors in Germany and Western Europe. Gazprom's profits were shared with the Russian government, and state gas and oil revenues were estimated in some years to be amount to as much as 45% of Russia's annual budget. American political fears were real. Putin would now have an additional and much-needed major source of income, and Germany and the rest of Western Europe would become addicted to low-cost natural gas supplied by Russia, while diminishing European reliance on America. In fact, that's exactly what happened. Many Germans saw Nord Stream 1 as part of the deliverance of former Chancellor Willy Brandt's famed Ostpolitik theory, which would enable post-war Germany to rehabilitate itself and other European nations destroyed in World War II by, among other initiatives, utilizing cheap Russian gas to fuel a prosperous Western European market and trading economy. Nord Stream 1 was dangerous enough in the view of NATO and Washington, but Nord Stream 2, whose construction was completed in September of 2021, would, if approved by German regulators, double the amount of cheap gas that would be available to Germany and Western Europe. The second pipeline would also provide enough gas for more than 50% of Germany's annual consumption. Tensions were constantly escalated between Russia and NATO, backed by the aggressive foreign policy of the Biden administration. Opposition to Nord Stream 2 flared on the eve of Biden's inauguration in January 2021, when Senate Republicans, led by Ted Cruz of Texas, repeatedly raised the political threat of cheap Russian natural gas during the confirmation hearing of Blinken as Secretary of State. By then, a unified Senate had successfully passed a law that, as Cruz told Blinken, halted the pipeline in its tracks. There would be enormous political and economic pressure from the German government, then headed by Angela Merkel, to get the second pipeline online. Would Biden stand up to the Germans? Blinken said yes, but added that he had not discussed the specifics of the incoming presidential views. I know his strong conviction that this is a bad idea, the Nord Stream 2. He said, I know that he would have us use every persuasive tool that we have to convince our friends and partners, including Germany, not to move forward with it. A few months later, as the construction of the second pipeline neared completion, Biden blinked. That May, in a stunning turnaround, the administration waived sanctions against Nord Stream AG, with a State Department official conceding that trying to stop the pipeline through sanctions and diplomacy had always been a long shot. Behind the scenes, administration officials reportedly urged Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, by then facing a threat of Russian invasion, not to criticize the move. There were immediate consequences. Senate Republicans, led by Cruz, announced an immediate blockade of all of Biden's foreign policy nominees and delayed passage of the annual defense bill for months, deep into the fall. Politico later depicted Biden's turnaround on the second Russian pipeline as the one decision, arguably more than the chaotic military withdrawal from Afghanistan, that had imperiled Biden's agenda. The administration was floundered despite getting a reprieve on the crisis in mid-November, when Germany's energy regulators suspended approval of the second Nord Stream pipeline. Natural gas price surged 8% within days amid growing fears in Germany and Europe that the pipeline suspension and the growing possibility of a war between Russia and Ukraine would lead to a very much unwanted cold winter. It was not clear to Washington, just like Olaf Scholz, Germany's newly appointed chancellor, stood. Months earlier, after the fall of Afghanistan, Scholz had publicly endorsed French President Emmanuel Macron's call for a more autonomous European foreign policy in a speech in Prague, clearly suggesting less reliance on Washington and its mercurial actions. Throughout all of this, Russian troops had been steadily and ominously building up on the borders of Ukraine, and by the end of December, more than 100,000 soldiers were in position to strike from Belarus and Crimea. Alarm was growing in Washington, including an assessment from Blinken that the troop numbers could be doubled in short order. The administration's attention once again was focused on Nord Stream. As long as Europe remained dependent on the pipelines for cheap natural gas, Washington was afraid that countries like Germany would be reluctant to supply Ukraine with the money and weapons it needed to defeat Russia. Oh, very interesting information. I've never read this before. It was at this unsettled moment that Biden authorized Jake Sullivan to bring together an interagency group to come up with a plan. All options were to be on the table, but only one would emerge. The planning category. Here we go. Well, you know what? Maybe I should make this several parts, guys. We'll call this part 1 of the Seymour Hersh on Substack, and we'll continue in part 2 for planning the Nord Stream pipeline destruction. Okay, this is Marcel, Ernie Racing News, part 1, and stay tuned for part 2, guys. And make sure to hit that like button to try to push this in the algorithm, because the channel is shadow banned. My subscribers are being minused at around 1,000 a month, and then the people that I actually bring in every month counter that. So then I lose around 600. I bring in 400 to counter the minus 1,000, etc. So if you hit that like button, it can push it into the algorithm. That's the only way to get it out there. Again, Marcel, stay tuned for part 2.